Hey there everyone, it is my big list. Like I said, I was only doing two. I've already done my live shows one, you should go check that out. But it is my big one. It's going to be my top albums of 2012, top 20 albums that is. But before I get stuck straight into the list, I am going to speak about a couple of things real quick. Firstly, I've only had this channel for like, 3 months, something like that, and I've already got a bunch of subscribers, which I could not be happier about. I'm so glad that you guys are actually interested in hearing me sort of talk about a bunch of albums that I'm not all that necessarily informed on, or whatever, but it's always fun, in my opinion, to talk about them into a camera. I enjoy doing it, and I'm glad there's people that kind of want to watch it. So make sure you keep it up. I'll try and make more videos. I know I've been slacking recently, but I'll definitely try as hard as I can to make a couple more this year. Now again, just before I kick into the list, I just want to quickly say that I have found this year kind of underwhelming for the most part in music. I didn't really think... There was maybe one or two albums, which are my top two, I'll get to them obviously later, that really stood out, and I thought my top two albums were absolute gems. But other than that, I didn't think this year was all that great, to be honest. We had a couple of really interesting releases, and for me personally it's been a really great year because I've just explored tons more genres than I normally would, which is always good, and I've just really sort of expanded my horizons and stuff like that. But anyway, enough chat, let's get stuck into this list. At number 20, first album of my list, Black Breath, Sentence to Life. Black Breath are a thrash metal crossover band that sort of have this heavy as hell crushing sound to them. This album was just a brilliant album front to back, full of absolutely crushing, melodic and just plain fast sections. I love their guitar tone. Like I said, it's stupidly fast thrash metal for the most part. If you're into that sort of thing, definitely check it out. At number 19, an album that I kind of liked a lot more and reviewed a lot more positively than this place in the list would suggest. It has sort of wore off a little bit, but I still enjoy it. Rolo Tomassi, Astria. Like I said, I reviewed it, and I gave it a very positive review for some very atmospheric sounding moments, some pretty decent songwriting, some interesting sounds, loads of layers and just stuff like that. And overall I did really enjoy it. I felt like the production let it down somewhat, but regardless, it definitely deserves to be in this top 20 list. At 18, an album I haven't talked about at all on this channel, or a band I haven't talked about at all on this channel, to be quite honest. But at 18, Swans with The Seer. Now, this is an incredibly ambitious return. If anyone knows about Swans, you'll know they were very important to post-punk in the 80s and 90s. But with this album, it's just a very, very long, ambitious, crushing album, incredibly torturous to listen to. It's 2 hours long, and it takes you through so many emotional levels, it's kind of hard to keep up. There are moments that are incredibly folky on it, there are moments that are incredibly heavy and industrial on it. It's just a really, really great album, to be honest. At number 17, Fiona Apple with The Idler Wheel, and I can't bother to read the rest of the album title because it's really bloody long. Fiona Apple is a singer-songwriter and pianist, and this is her first album in 7 years. That's one hell of a break. And at the core, she's kept to the same sound as before, the same sort of piano rock sound that's infused with a bit of jazz here and there and stuff like that. It's a very emotionally potent record. She pours a lot of emotion into her lyrics and singing, and it really comes across well. One of my favourite things about this record is the very well-written, incredibly visual lyrics. At number 16, another album I reviewed, The Chariot with One Wing. Like I said, I reviewed it, and I thought it wasn't as good as their previous record, Long Live, but it was still enjoyable, an incredibly colourful, incredibly experimental record, at least as far as The Chariot goes anyway. At number 15, Loma Prieta with 4 or IV, I'm not sure which yet. An incredibly noisy, abrasive and just pummeling post-hardcore record. Shout out to Deathwish label, by the way, run by, co-founded by Jacob of Converge. It's a brilliant label that have released a couple of great releases this year. Got a couple more on the list actually that I'll get around to. This album, like I said, was incredibly punishing, short as well. However, it did have a nice sense of melody at parts too. Ultimately, I just really enjoyed this record. At number 14, the almighty Godspeed You Black Emperor return with Alleluia, Don't Bend, Ascend. It's their first record in 10 years. Now, a lot of people were incredibly excited about this record, despite not knowing it was actually coming out. They just sort of released it at a show and then it got online. But ultimately, on this record, they've proved that despite it's been such a long break, they can still make larger-than-life, incredibly cinematic post-rock. Some incredible highs, beautiful lows as usual, nothing too unusual for a Godspeed record here. They are still messing around with drones and, experimental sounds and whatnot. Ultimately, I feel like it would have been a tad higher if it was a bit more cohesive. It's essentially 2 20-minute monsters and then 2 6-minute drones, which in my opinion just don't really fit all that well. They're nice on their own, but more material would have certainly been nice. At number 13, Captain Murphy with his mixtape Duality. It was a great mixtape from a very mysterious rapper who turned out to be Flying Lotus in the end. I love the instrumentals on this album, the samples and production all very great, clear, kind of psychedelic in a sense. Also, one of my favourite parts about this album was he had this sort of cult leader instructional tapes that were sampled into it, and they were really great and entertaining. I wish the lyrics kind of went along those lines, sadly they didn't, but regardless, a great mixtape nonetheless. At number 12, Gallows with the self-titled album Gallows. After making my favourite record pretty much of all time, and losing one of my favourite frontmen, I was kind of sceptical as to how this would fare, but the end result was damned good. Very catchy, anthemic and blood-pumping hardcore punk that really takes influence from all over the punk spectrum, including post-hardcore, punk rock, hardcore punk, and just all sorts of other types of things. At number 11, Periphery with Periphery 2. Fantastic prog metal record, very catchy and memorable. To be honest, there's not really a great else to say. If you like Gent, you'll probably dig this record. It's slightly different to their debut and other Gent bands in the sense that it's not quite as heavy on the bottom string, and also it focuses somewhat more on songwriting as opposed to technical ability a lot of the time. That's not to say it isn't a technical record, it certainly is, just maybe not as much as bands like Animals as Leaders or Monuments. Halfway through the list, at number 10, we have Code Orange Kids with Love Is Love, Return to Dust. Before I speak about this record, I'm doing that vinyl giveaway. Don't forget to enter it. Go check it out, because I'm giving away a free vinyl. I don't know why you wouldn't want a free vinyl. So seriously, go check that out. All you gotta do is comment. But ultimately, this band are a great new hardcore punk band. Also on Death Wish, like I said before, they're very young. They have an incredibly gritty, bass-heavy sound. It sort of crushes everything in its path. It's this like lumbering giant of a record. It has a surprising amount of variation and beautiful moments as well, despite the fact it is so crushingly heavy. An incredibly dark, well-produced, and just plain brilliant record. Go check it out. At number 9, The Algorithm with Polymorphic Code, and this thing provides the most bananas mix of music I've heard all year, and likely you will hear all year. Electronic genres ranging from house, drum and bass, dubstep, and even chiptune, clashing on this thing with a sort of gent prog metal style. There's even a song that includes a reggae part. I don't know how you can argue with this guy. He just writes brilliant songs that are just super fun, somewhat technical, and the fact they've been recorded by a live drummer is really quite impressive. Go check it out. At number 8, we have Alt J with An Awesome Wave, a slightly more chilled, eccentric indie rock record / art rock record. It's their debut, in my opinion, the debut of the year. Very well written, varied songs. I found the dude's voice kind of hypnotic in a sense, and I just love the sounds I was hearing. I can't wait to see what they do in the future. Hopefully I'll get to see them live this year too. At number 7, Bats with The Sleep of Reason. Bats are a post-punk / post-hardcore band that mix in math rock and prog rock as well to really mix things up. They draw from a lot of influences, admittedly, and it kind of helps create a unique sound for the band. You can kind of pick them out a lot of the times. Perfect example is if you like Fall of Troy, and like any sane person, you miss them. These guys are about as close as you will get to that sound. Definitely check it out if you're a fan of Fall of Troy. At number 6, we have Kendrick Lamar with Good Kid, Mad City. This is an incredible conceptual hip-hop album that talks about a kid kind of stuck in a gang way of life due to his peers and the people that surround him, and it touches down on sort of all his internal conflict and covers a large amount of ground regarding this lifestyle to create a very conscious message without sort of jamming it down the listener's throat. Not to mention, the instrumentals for the most part were absolutely great and on point. It's an incredibly varied record instrumentally, and I just love the concept behind this thing. The images are so vivid, you can really get a story and a feel of what's going on. And this thing includes quite a lot of nice skits as well, which is something that's rare for me in hip-hop. I don't usually like skits in hip-hop albums, but this had some skits that kind of go along with the story and they work very well with it. At number 5, another hip-hop album, but admittedly kind of different to the previous ones I've mentioned. Death Grips with No Love Deep Web. This thing is kind of a contorted monster of an experimental hip-hop album that mixes in elements of industrial as well as it kind of has this punk rock edge as well, and this punk rock aesthetic to it. No Love Deep Web is a very dark, intense listen that focuses around the character of MC Ride, and the band has done this throughout their entire career. But this inflection of MC Ride is much more depressed, much more paranoid, much more schizophrenic, and it's just an incredibly dark and tortured journey that will deliver some very unique, hard-hitting and fantastic instrumentals and production value. You should definitely check it out. Also, it's available for download completely free courtesy of the band, so definitely check that out. At number 4, Regina Spektor with What We Saw from the Cheap Seats. Regina is another singer-songwriter who brings in the sounds of anti-folk, baroque pop and indie folk into her latest release. It's incredibly varied musically and emotionally, going from sort of really uplifting and fun-loving lyrics to addressing cancer and other certain dark topics. The music for the most part is pretty upbeat and light-hearted for the most part, which creates sort of an interesting contrast to some of the subject matters. Also really like some of the somewhat abstract lyrics that she kind of brings in to create a nice vision. At number 3, Aesop Rock with Skeleton. Aesop Rock is a hip-hop artist, and this album displays his first time handling his production. I personally thought he absolutely nailed it on this record. The instrumentals are very unique and interesting, but above all else, this dude is a downright genius when it comes to writing lyrics. I think every album that he releases should come with a dictionary and a thesaurus, just so you can sort of try to grasp what he's kind of saying, because his words are just so complex and he's just such a wordy MC. It really can be hard to decipher some of these tracks. I will say though, they're definitely worth digging into because lyrically he just covers some really bizarre subjects. On this album alone, it includes a song where he visits a donut shop and then also a song about mummifying a cat. Definitely check it out. At number 2, we're getting high on this list now, we have Converge with All We Love We Leave Behind. I know perhaps a lot of you expected this to be my number 1 if you saw my review of it, but here we are, and I'll say Converge, in my opinion, seriously outdid themselves on this one. For me anyway, it's my second favourite, just beneath Jane Doe. Just a fantastic record with tons of melody, tons of heaviness, some technical ability without taking away from songwriting, and it's incredibly passionate. I love this album on pretty much every level. Lyrics as well, very memorable songs with a few surprises, and plenty of classic Converge material. Quite honestly, what's not to love? But my number 1 album of 2012 is going to be Death Grips with The Money Store. Another Death Grips release. The previous one was obviously No Love Deep Web. This was actually the earlier one, and this release is another contorted beast of a hip-hop album. It takes elements and sounds from industrial, rock, punk, even noise as well to a certain degree. But despite all this aggressive behaviour, it kind of still has some of the catchiest songs of the year without sacrificing any of the kind of hard-hitting sonic effect. This album is pummeling and challenging. It's unapologetic, it's stomach-churning lyrically and musically, but it's also incredibly detailed with tons of like nice glitchiness as well. Quite frankly, it's just plain amazing, and I don't really have any words to describe how amazing this album is. It's one of my favourites ever. My favourite this year, obviously. And you're only hurting yourself by not checking it out, quite honestly. So if you do anything today, go check out The Money Store if you haven't already. But anyway, that concludes my top albums of 2012. I'm glad you've actually watched the video up until this point, because it's likely going to be quite a long one, maybe 20 minutes perhaps. Also, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment and subscribe. Post your list down below. Advise each other on albums, advise me on albums you think I may have missed out on. If you check out any of the albums on this list, let me know what you thought. If you already know some of the albums on this list, let me know what you thought again. And I will catch you guys and gals later. Welcome to 2013.